Alright, ladies and turds, welcome to the wonderful world of cannibalism, brought to you by me. Exclusive? But y'all know about cannibalism, right? It's like when Joe's in the high school locker room and he gets the slightest glimmer of Bread's big old meaty hog, and he has an awakening. A sexual awakening. Are all those thirsty thoughts that come crawling into my direct messages, begging me to let them swallow my children? No! Stop! Don't do that! Bad dog! Stop doing that before I have to rub your snout in my duty! Oh, this is off to a wonderful, wonderful start. Cannibalism, it's happening all over the place. In county parks, in bathrooms, in restrooms, and your daughter's little violin recital. If we just open this window, look at that! It's a big old beefy toad cake. What is that? What do they call those? Tadpoles! It's a big old beefy tadpole swimming around, killing all of its brothers and sisters. Isn't that just wonderful? Survival of the fittest, bitch. And if we take a trip over here and open this window, well, look at that. It's the father clownfish walking around in the middle of the night. Some would call it sleepwalking. And he just decided to snack on his children because he's bored or something. I don't know. Survival of the fittest, you bitch. And if we take a casual jaunt on over to the bedroom and open this little door, well, look at that. It's a little praying mantis and snails both eating the heads of their mates. But it's not the same head. And not to go too long on the mating habits of snails, but when you read the Kama Sutra, apparently biting off their penis causes them to not only fuck way better, but also it causes them to ejaculate tenfold like a goddamn horse. That's a weird saying. Why do we use that? What does that even mean? And don't worry about Papa Snail over here. Snails happen to be hermaphrodites, so if he gets his little dingle ripped off, he gets to just continue life as a little woman. A little woman? Like the movie with Saoirse Ronan? I guess. I just want to suck on Timothy Chalamet's nipples. Mamma mia, take me to the pizzeria. But also, did you know that the origin of the myth of the Cupid, that chubby shithead baby that's always shooting its love sticks at morons, making them fall in love? We believe that it's based off of ancient Greece kind of observing snails with their little binoculars. Because when it's mating season, they like to take a look at their counterpart and just shoot what they call love dots into these motherfuckers, basically marking sexual territory. And sometimes these love dots just tend to pierce straight through essential organs, and your mate ends up dying. Man, if there's any a clue that you should die fucking alone, it's if somebody dies when you're trying to have sex with them. Good golly me, oh me, oh my. Survival of the fittest, you bitch. Good God, the animal kingdom must suck to live in. And if there's anybody that gets all icky gooey, squirmy, upset tummy diarrhea over cannibalism, it's you fucking fleshbags. So who's really the weirdo in this situation? But I guess I'm gonna put on my etymology hat and we're gonna talk about where the word cannibal comes from. You see, in 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We've all heard this story of genocide. Whatever version of the myth that you want to believe. But when he's there, he runs into these natives, immediately noticing that they don't have any indoor plumbing, they don't have any electricity, so obviously, it doesn't take a big brain to find out that these are just a bunch of fucking savages. These goddamn idiots not having a toilet in their house. But in his correspondence back to the motherland, he talked about the Arawaks and how they warned him of this other more warmongering tribe that just so happens to sometimes maybe possibly just feast on the flesh of their enemies. Ooh. The Arawaks, they called them the Caribs. The Caribs? Caribs? Something like that. I don't know. I was reading. I wasn't listening. So when he goes back and he's talking to the queen, he's like, oh yeah, these cannons. And we don't know if Christopher Columbus is if he's an idiot and he just didn't hear them correctly because he's a big old dummy, or if he's making a joke because cannibs is the Latin word for dog. So maybe he's calling them dog-faced motherfuckers. But the point is he wants gold. He was being sent there for gold. So then he goes back and he tells the Arawaks,
hey, it's Christopher Columbus here, and if you don't give us all the gold that you have found, then we're gonna have to take some legal action. And we all know that that would make you a cannibal, and cannibalism is an act against God. So we're just gonna have to end up slaughtering all of you.
Plot twist, he still slaughtered them. And this narrative of these dog-faced, human flesh-eating savages became an impenetrable, well, that's penetrating, an impenetrable stereotype for centuries. Flash forward far into the future to the year 1942. I only chose that year because they use the same numbers as 40. The world is practically on fire. Japanese are killing the Chinese. Russians are killing the Germans. Germans are killing the French. French are killing nobody. The US had just started experimenting with a new form of warfare and had developed a new sect of the Navy that they would call the Flyboys. It's the Air Force. The Flyboys. I don't think it's any more possible to have a more homosexual term. You fucking respect it. George H.W. Bush, the 40-whatever fucking something president of the United States of America, just so happened to be one of these flyboys. And allegedly watched his son masturbate inside of a coffin. Allegedly. Too bad that most of these flyboys would get shot out of the sky like shitty little pigeons and be captured by the Japanese as prisoners of war. But don't worry about this fuck, he was lucky enough to get picked up by the good guys. But everybody else? The Japanese were some devoted motherfuckers. They'd be any general's wet dream. They were indoctrinated with this belief that Emperor Hirohito was a fucking god, and that in the 11th hour, through divine intervention, he would ensure victory for the Japanese. There's these guys that were dropped off in the Philippines in the middle of the war. Hey, you make sure that we keep control of this place. You hear me? Uh-huh. And they would keep fighting, slaughtering innocent civilians for 30 goddamn years after the end of the war. They had to get the general out of his fucking retirement home to come and talk some sense into this guy and tell him to just fucking stop. So these generals on Chichijima, they're just drunk with power and sake. And they got these wimpy, pale little crackers. And these Japanese soldiers are just starting to cozy up to them. I have some assumption that they maybe possibly, and this is purely just baseless musing. I think they were sharing sleeping bags. And right as Japan is losing the war, the generals get all...
Alright, to be honest, the future is not looking very good. So I think it is time that we commit some very serious war crimes. So if you could cut out the livers of all of those white fuckers and serve them to me on a plate, that would be very good. And be sure to dispose of the remains properly, because this is going to create one hell of a lawsuit that is going to put us into financial turmoil and may lead to the bombing of one of our cities. Maybe, possibly, probably not.
And this isn't the only example of cannibalism from the Japanese in World War II. As they were making their way across the battlefield, they would take their bayonets and slice off chunks of meat from the dead and just put that in their little pudding pouch for later. Why? Because they're fucking starving. They don't have enough resources to sustain this war, but they're gonna die until the very end because, you know, the whole divine intervention or whatever. Hunger is a fickle fucker. Most of these stories play exactly the same almost every single time. Facing the elements, people just start knocking off one by one. Everybody's dying. They're miserable. They're angry. They're looking like a fucking sack of bones. And then somebody gets the bright idea. Maybe we should just start eating the dead instead of all of us dying. Some of us can survive and prosper. But it seems that every time that anybody ever makes the step towards cannibalism,
every sense of decency is just off the table.
They become ravenous monsters starting to plot which of the next that they're gonna kill just so they can start scooping out their brains. Like these fuckheads in the Donner Party. Or the dinner party. Back in 18-something whatever, James K. Polk was aggressively campaigning to take on the Mexican territory that included like California, parts of Texas. He just wanted this lovely country to go from sea to shining sea. He tried to purchase it fair and square, but the Mexicans were all like, no. So Polk does what any self-respecting president does, and he urges his moronic populace to just walk their hippie-ass cross country and set up shop. We'll just overwhelm the territory with white people. You piss in the dirt long enough and eventually it's yours, right? But y'all remember that Oregon Trail video game that they all made you play in elementary school, right? The world is being overtaken in 90s nostalgia because us millennials are getting old. So we're taking the world and trying to form it and mold it into a shittier version of what we grew up with. It's more plasticky and dumb. Back to the 1800s. So the banks are promising these very lucrative rights for land that they don't even own. So these families pick up grandma and all these potatoes, and I feel like there's some sort of common misbelief that these assholes just get to sit back in the cart while the oxen do all the work. No, because that's too much of a strain on the animals. Peter was really working for animal rights. Now isn't that just fucking miserable? Children are dying left and right, whether it be from dysentery, the common flu, or just being accidentally shot by their parents.
Daddy, you shot me.
Full field, tuck the knees in, grab them.
And not to go off on another tangent, boy do I love going off on tangents. But let's talk about the idea of birth control back 200 some odd years ago. You see, us guys, we'd have to carry around some sheep intestine that we just stuffed in our bucket. And every time we wanted to get our knickers off, we had to make sure that piece of shit was clean.
And women,
They basically make a mud pie out in the backyard and shove it up in the cooch. The only way that women knew they were pregnant is from what they called the quickening, which is the feeling of a little eel rubbing around in your tummy. But what do? You don't want some little shithead sucking on your tail while you're trying to walk across the country. You start drowning yourself in poisons, or you have Billy the Butcher just start swinging you around until that little fucker just stops moving. But the Donner Party was made up of what, I don't know, like 80-something people? It's like 5 families or whatever, all just trying to get to the promised land of California and Oregon. But they're getting their GPS from some guy who just looked at a map and said, instead of going the way that everybody and their mama has gone, what if we just take this incidentally shorter route that I haven't gone on, that I haven't walked before, that I have just thought up in my little stinky brain? It's just not feasible. But there's a million fucking setbacks. People are dying left and right. Arguments are breaking out. You're getting a little bit of road rage. Some guy just ends up getting shot. They vote the guy that killed him off the island like it's some sort of survivor situation. And they even run into the guy who has proposed this miserable path, who is on his way back from California to just see exactly what he's recommending to people, because I guess he's not actually a bad guy. And he's begging, he's on his knees, he's pleading to these people, please don't go. Whatever you do, do not take the path that I recommended. You are going to die. I promise you, you are going to. And what do they do? No. They end up getting stranded in the mountains because of the torrential downpour of snow, because they were so delayed from everything that happened before. They build up a cabin, they try to hunker down and wait it out, and at some point they just start eating each other in both parties. It takes a little bit longer from one to the other, but it's right around Christmas. They're like, oh boy, I'm hungry. Before they actually resorted to the cannibalism, they stopped bickering between each other about who's gonna have to die first. What they eventually end up doing is a sophisticated form of decision making, which is known as drawing straw. Whoever draws the shortest straw, well, you're the lucky son of a bitch who's gonna fucking die. Some Irish dude was gonna have to bite the bullet. So now they got him right on his knees, gun pressed right up against his temple, as if it's like the Boondock Saints or something. Snot's running out of his nose, shit's running out of his ass. Dude's fucking terrified, and they're like, we're just gonna wait for somebody to die instead of being the arbiter of our own fate. But the problem was that it was too late. Sergeant Potato over here, over the course of the night, simply just goes insane, strips off all of his clothes and runs off into the woods and dies. Now, whether this is from the hypothermia or simply going insane from being on the brink of being eaten alive, we don't know. But the same exact thing happened on it was a boat or a submarine or something. The crew had already eaten the captain's slave, and the tummy was still grumbling. And seeing as they had no other slaves to eat, because they were seen as property and not fellow human beings, they decided to draw straws. And the exact same thing happened. The only difference, the crew members were saved the following morning. The Diner Party, however, their misfortune has only just begun. The big noteworthy thing to mention here is that like 90% of the casualties were men. It's something about how women have more fat stores, but it's also possible that the men were working harder for longer and thus utilizing more calories, allowing them to atrophy just a little faster. But it really didn't take that long for these people to resort to cannibalism. Unlike the whale ship Essex, which by the way was the inspiration for Moby Dick, a battle-torn mega whale crashes straight into a whaling ship, forcing all of these people to be stranded on 3 lifeboats. They drifted on the sea for like 2 months before munching on each other's bones. In this situation, all of the black people happened to die off first, purely because they just didn't have nearly as much fat. Isn't it strange that back in the day, being a fat fuck meant you were a rich fuck, and now nearly 200 years later, it's the exact opposite? But why exactly did the Donner Party resort to cannibalism just days after not having food? Because they're stupid. All these assholes are dying off left and right, and they assume they're dying of hunger, not the 12 feet of snow on -degree temperatures that they're living through. Oh, Johnny's toes aren't black because of frostbite, it's because the hunger got to him. And inside the Donner Party, they had Franklin Graves and Anna Graves. It's a father-daughter duo.
No incest here, you dirty, dirty dog.
But in the moment of pure desperation, Franklin Graves is laying there, just on the brink of death. He was the leader of the party that sent them off walking to, try to find some help, basically. And he's laying there, and he's dying, and he looks to Anna, and he holds a sweet little hand and says, "Anna, you gotta eat me. If not for myself, but for your own survival. Please, just feast on my bones, so that you may live until the end of time, even though it will provide a great sense of shame and haunt you for the rest of your life. Please, just eat me." But what if your tummy isn't all grumbling and you decide that you just want to start snacking on some humans? Maybe you're Andre Chikatilo, who had the habit of keeping little girl uteruses inside of his pocket as if it were a pack of gum, and he just liked to chew on it, or just get the inclination while he's in the middle of murdering these little boys to just bite off the little nippies. Stop calling me a cannibal! Or maybe you're just Jeffrey Dahmer, who just wanted a brainless sex slave because he just didn't want to hear them talk. He was so tired of hearing about other people's problems, he just wanted them to shut the fuck up and suck his dick. He felt bad that he was some sort of arbiter of fate, that he was judge, jury, and executioner, so he'd make little Johnson sandwiches so that their tortured souls would live on in his little tum-tum.
I have eaten a sandwich from you. I have probably eaten someone's body part. How dare you do this to me?
Oh, and maybe when you're Googling cannibal serial killers, you might come across a man known as the Crossbow Cannibal. It's a very lucrative title, but there isn't much evidence
that he actually ate his victim.
He really just comes off as a big fat nerd romanticizing the lives of other sociopaths, and is stupid enough to nearly set his apartment on fire when trying to dispose of remains of one of his victims. Oh, and maybe you heard in the tabloids in your National Enquirer or whatever a few years ago about these soulmates that met on OkCupid. He wanted to die, he wanted to eat somebody alive, a match made in heaven. But just imagine the idea of suffering from depression because you just wanted to stew human body parts with onions and peppers. What kind of miserable, poor sack of shit existence must you be living? Really? What a fucking joke. But they end up getting together through the power of the internet. Person A goes down on person B and starts, cranking his nab. And then he decides, oh, I'm just gonna bite this motherfucker off. But it's just too gummy. So then they just end up cleaving it off. So he stews it up with some peppers and onions and he tries to eat it, but the texture is still just too gummy and it wasn't very satisfying. Person B is practically bleeding out in the bathtub. So person A comes in with a delicious plate of peppers, onions, and cock, and he tries to feed it to person B, but person B just doesn't seem too interested in eating his own penis. Person A pulls out a knife and jams it straight in his throat to put person B out of his misery, and proceeds to hang his body on a meat hook to drain it of all the blood, and proceeds to dine on his carcass for 4 months before the police come knocking on the door. Person A had a statement. Hold on, let me find it. It was not worth it. What's the big problem with eating human flesh? Really? Millions of rich little white girls around the world are practicing a special little form of cannibalism every single year. You see, pregnancy is something that happens quite a lot. And they've decided instead of consulting a doctor like the right thing to do, they find some other woman who's like the expert in giving birth. They set up aromatherapy candles and they make you chew on a piece of bark because it's more natural. And more often than not, it ends in a tub full of poop soup. But they swear that snacking on your placenta after birth helps wayside a lot of that postpartum depression, so that you don't drown said infant in the poopy soup. And for some reason, this is completely acceptable. You might as well just cut off hunks of your own liver. But don't worry, because it'll just grow back. But you see, anthropologists were studying these native tribes of the Fiji Islands back like 30 some odd years ago or something. And a lot of them seem to be just kind of dropping off like flies. And if by flies you mean quaking and shaking and giggling until they just fucking die. But the scientists with their top hats and monocles were all, this is kind of weird. I wonder what's happening to them. They said something like, we're pretty sure that these tribes are practicing cannibalism. Now, we haven't seen it, but we're pretty sure based on evidence that it is happening. It's like sex. We don't see that they're having sex, but just by the fact that every few years there's more and more of them around, we just know that it's happening. To which Nigel Thornberry interjects, of course you've seen them fucking. In fact, I've seen you engaged in rather uproarious fornication just last Tuesday. It turns out that when elders of a given family pass on to the great islands of the sky, the women and children would feast on the remains of the deceased in honor and respect of their lives of something, I guess. And because of the continued cannibalism for generations and generations, holes would start forming in the cerebellum. You know, the thing that keeps us upright and walking like a good old boy. Which would then cause the shaking and the quivering and the laughing. They called it the kuru. The tribes would call it kuru or something like that. It's very similar to when cows had mad cow disease. It's a factoid like that they tell you in elementary school that gets passed around among all the children. I heard it. But the scientists would tell them, hey, stop doing that. It's killing you. We're not necessarily sure that they stopped doing it. Slowly as decades went by, the disease just kind of faded away into dreams. So maybe let's not eat each other if we get the chance. And you know, if you have soft fantasies of swallowing little boy cocks, please get some help. Bye-bye!